A date appears on the calendar, Friday the 13th. For some people, it means nothing, just another Friday. But for others, the date feels unlucky before the day even begins. They avoid travel. They hesitate before making plans. They joke about bad luck. They notice every small thing that goes wrong. A spilled drink, a missed call, a flat tire, a weird feeling in the air. But why this date? Why Friday? Why the number 13? And how did two ordinary things on a calendar become one of the most famous symbols of bad luck? I'm Earl, the creator of Everyday Sayings and Origins. To keep each episode consistent, I use my digital likeness. Now, back to the story. Today, Friday the 13th is treated as an unlucky day in many parts of popular culture. Movies use it, news stories mention it, people talk about it whenever it appears. Some laugh it off, some take it seriously, and many people fall somewhere in the middle. They may not truly believe the date is cursed, but they still notice it. That is part of what makes the superstition interesting. It does not need everyone to believe deeply. It only needs people to recognize the idea. Once enough people treat a date as unlucky, the date starts to feel different. The calendar has not changed, but the story attached to the calendar has. To understand Friday the 13th, we need to look at two separate pieces, the fear of Friday and the fear of 13. Those two ideas existed before the modern phrase became famous. The date became powerful because it combined them. Start with the number 13. In many Western traditions, 12 has often been seen as complete, balanced, or orderly. There are 12 months in a year, 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 hours on a clock face. 12 was a number that felt structured. Then comes 13, one more than 12, just past the neat pattern. That may be one reason 13 picked up an uneasy feeling. It sits outside the comfortable count. It feels like the extra guest, the number that does not fit cleanly at the table. That feeling shows up in old stories and customs. One of the most famous examples is the Last Supper. There were 13 people at the table before the betrayal and crucifixion of Jesus. Because of that, some people connected 13 at a table with danger, betrayal, or death. This does not mean every fear of 13 comes from that one story. Superstitions rarely have one clean source, but it helped feed the idea that 13 could be unlucky. Over time, that fear became strong enough to shape real behavior. Some buildings skip a 13th floor. Some hotels avoid room 13. Some people avoid 13 guests at a dinner table. Again, not everyone believes in it, but the habit is familiar enough that most people understand it. That is how a superstition spreads. Even people who do not believe may still follow it, because avoiding the number feels easier than challenging the feeling. Now look at Friday. Friday also carried a complicated reputation in some traditions. In Christian history, Friday became linked with the crucifixion of Jesus. That gave the day a serious, sorrowful meaning. There were also old beliefs that certain activities were unlucky if started on a Friday. Sailing, traveling, beginning a major project, starting something important. For some people, Friday was not simply the end of the work week. It was a day with religious weight and folk caution attached to it. That may sound strange now, because modern culture often treats Friday as something good. The weekend is coming, work is ending, people are ready to relax. But older meanings can survive under newer ones. A day can be cheerful in one setting and unlucky in another. That is part of what happened here. Friday had one stream of unlucky meaning, 13 had another. At some point, those streams came together. Friday the 13th became the date where two unlucky ideas overlapped. But here's the important part. The modern fear of Friday the 13th may not be as ancient as people think. People sometimes talk about it as if everyone has feared this exact date for thousands of years. The truth is less simple. The separate fears are old. The specific focus on Friday the 13th as a single unlucky date seems to become more noticeable in more recent history. That matters because it shows how superstitions can be built from older parts. You can have an old fear of Friday. You can have an old fear of 13. But the famous combined superstition can still be newer than people assume. There is also a popular story that connects Friday the 13th to the Knights Templar. According to that version, members of the order were arrested on Friday, October 13th, in the year 1307. It is a dramatic story, a powerful order, a sudden arrest, a date that already sounds unlucky. It is easy to see why people repeat it. But as an explanation for the modern superstition, it is not as solid as it sounds. the Templar event happened, but the idea that it directly created the modern fear of Friday the 13th is much harder to prove. It may be one of those stories that was attached later because it fit the date so well. That does not make it useless. It shows how people like to give superstitions a dramatic origin. A date feels unlucky, so people search history for a reason. If they find an event that matches the date, the event becomes part of the legend. But matching a date is not the same as proving an origin. That is a pattern we see again and again. The most memorable explanation is not always the most accurate one. Friday the 13th is powerful because it does not depend on one story. It is more like a stack of meanings. 13 feels uneasy. Friday carries old religious and folk warnings. The date appears on the calendar. Stories attached to it. Movies and popular culture make it bigger. Then people keep talking about it. And every time they do, the superstition gets another small push. That is how a date becomes famous. Not all at once. Piece by piece. A little religion. A little folklore. A little number fear. A little history. A little entertainment. A lot of repetition. The fear of the number 13 even has a name, though it is not exactly easy to say. Triskaidekaphobia. That means fear of 13, but most people do not need the formal word. They know the feeling without naming it. 13 just seems unlucky, and Friday the 13th gives that fear a place to land. A single square on the calendar. That is one reason the superstition works so well. It is specific. Bad luck is usually vague. It could happen any time, but Friday the 13th gives people a date to watch, a day to joke about, a day to blame. If something goes wrong on a normal Tuesday, it is just annoying. If something goes wrong on Friday the 13th, people notice the pattern. They say, "Of course this happened today." That is human nature. We look for meaning in timing. We remember the moments that fit the story. We forget the moments that do not. If you spill coffee on Friday the 13th, it feels like proof. If Friday the 13th passes quietly, you may not remember it at all. That is one reason superstitions can be hard to shake. They are not only about what happens, they are about what people notice. A belief teaches you where to look. Once you are watching for bad luck, ordinary problems can feel like signs. That does not mean the day has power. It means the story has power, and stories can shape how a day feels. Friday the 13th also became stronger because of entertainment. The date sounds dramatic. It looks good in a title. It carries built-in tension. Even before anyone explains it, the phrase feels like a warning. That made it perfect for horror culture. Once movies, books, and television used the date, the superstition became even more familiar. Popular culture did not create every part of the fear, but it helped spread it. It gave the date a mood. Dark woods, bad omens, strange timing, something waiting to go wrong. That mood is now attached to the phrase for many people. Even if they do not believe in bad luck, they understand the atmosphere. That is why the superstition survives so well. It works as belief. It works as a joke. It works as a movie title. It works as a conversation starter. It works as a calendar event. A superstition that can be serious and playful has more ways to survive. Some people avoid big decisions on Friday the 13th. Some people use the day for themed parties. Some people watch scary movies. Some people simply mention it at work and move on. The belief changes depending on the person, but the date stays recognizable. There is also something interesting about the way people treat unlucky dates. They give uncertainty a name. Life always has risk. Any day can go wrong, but an unlucky date gives people a way to organize that worry. Instead of saying bad things can happen anytime, people say, "Be careful, it is Friday the 13th. That can sound silly, but it also makes fear more manageable. A vague fear becomes a calendar square. You can point to it, laugh at it, plan around it, or ignore it. That is part of the purpose of superstition. It gives shape to uncertainty. It gives people small rituals, warnings, or stories to use when life feels unpredictable. Friday the 13th is one of the clearest examples. It takes two ordinary parts of the calendar and turns them into a symbol, a weekday, a number. Together, they become a warning. So, is Friday the 13th actually unlucky? There is no solid reason to believe the date itself causes bad events. But that does not mean the superstition is meaningless. Its meaning comes from history, religion, folklore, number symbolism, and the way people notice patterns. The day is not powerful because the calendar is cursed. It is powerful because people have spent years telling stories about it. That is usually how superstition works. A belief begins somewhere. It gathers explanations. It survives through repetition. Then, long after the original reasons become blurry, people still recognize the feeling. Friday the 13th may be unlucky for some people simply because they expect it to be. They walk into the day with caution, they watch for trouble, they connect normal problems to the date, the story changes their attention, and once attention changes, the day feels different. That may be the real power of Friday the 13th, not magic, meaning a date becomes a symbol because people agree to treat it like one. So why is Friday the 13th considered unlucky? Because Friday already carried old religious and folk warnings, because 13 was seen by many as an uneasy number outside a familiar pattern, because dramatic stories attached themselves to the date, and because popular culture turned the whole thing into one of the most recognizable bad luck symbols in the world. It is not one clean origin. It is a pile of old fears that found a home on the same day, a number that felt wrong, a day with heavy associations, a calendar square people could point to, and a story that kept growing every time someone said, "Careful, it's Friday the 13th." If you enjoyed discovering the story behind this everyday superstition, subscribe to Everyday Sayings and Origins. Each episode uncovers the hidden history behind the words, phrases, rhymes, and traditions we use without thinking. I'm Earl. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next origin. Peace.